All right. Welcome to the show today. Today we've got Lindsay Roberts in here, who is a coach, speaker, and she's going to start off, it sounds like, grilling me here on kind of how this setup all happened. So what do you got for me, Lindsay?
Yeah, so I just can't help myself because curiosity is like my number one thing. So when it came to getting all of this equipment before you even necessarily had this idea, like how did you get started in this?
Like I was saying earlier, I've just always kind of been a tech nerd, or if a new piece of camera comes out, or a drone or a GoPro, it's like, ooh, I want to get that. And then I'll watch 10 YouTube videos on how to do everything with it.
Which YouTube is amazing. You have to have YouTube.
YouTube is amazing. Yeah. So, and then kind of when podcasting got started, oddly enough, like I am a pretty quiet person.
I'm not going to lie.
The guy.
I've gotten that sense from you.
Yeah, but I love doing stuff. I guess if you put a mic in front of me, it kind of flips my personality. No, I mean, me and my brothers started off, we're like, we should do a podcast. And they were like, we don't have any gear, So we tried it one night just with our iPhone sitting in the middle of us with the voice memo app. And we're like, I wonder if we could even talk for 30 minutes or 20 minutes. Can people really talk for?
You were wondering if you and your brothers can talk
for 30 minutes.
I know. That's what I was just thinking. Like, if you're questioning whether you can talk for 30 minutes, you're going to have to cut yourself off.
And I'm not going to lie, this was late at night. So, the conversations were flowing, pretty easily.
Yeah.
But, so we were like, you know what? That's actually pretty good audio, even just from the iPhone. And, we were able to talk longer than we thought. So then it kind of slowly went down the rabbit hole of, this was fun. Now let's kind of see what kind of gear was out there. So we started the Eastus Brothers podcast, really just recording from our phones. There was an app you could use. It's called Anchor. If anybody wants to get into
Anchor
is the name of the app. It's free. It's great. It'll publish all your episodes to Spotify and iTunes, and just using the mic from your iPhone. So me and Bo and Josie would be in 3 different Bo would be in Oregon, Josie was in Kansas City, and I was here, and it'd link us all together, and we'd do our podcasts and get them published. And then kind of the more we got to doing it, again, I just go down that rabbit hole of, what's the best gear out there to get? When I have a hobby, I tend to kind of go all in on it.
I mean, I feel like that's how you should be with hobbies, right? You find fun in that, you get enjoyment out of it, and you just get to chat with your brothers.
Exactly.
Like, how can it get much better than that?
That's how it started. So then it was like, there's this new piece of Rodecaster, so I got that. Started playing with that, and it was like, well, I need 1 mic, and then, what if I want to have 3 people on? I better get 4 mics.
Absolutely, so, you've got it, So it just kind of blew up from there.
Yeah, and then, we did it all from our basement, and then kind of when COVID hit, we started doing some football games, and had the set because I had the setup to do it, and was like, this is fun, but it'd be nice to have an actual bigger space to invite people, to do more podcasting. It's odd to invite someone into your basement and to do a podcast.
Might be a bit weird. Hey, you want to come over to my basement? We'll just sit and chat.
So the opportunity opened up to kind of do this. It was like, well, sure, let's put a studio in, and now here we are. So,
it's so cool. Well, and it's just been fun to hear and see some of the podcasts that you've been doing with folks and you're bringing in. So,
I hope people enjoy it. That's really the only reason I do it is because it's fun for me. And, so I hope other people enjoy listening to it.
Yeah.
So
I feel like that's the best way to go about doing things, right?
I think so. I mean, I think that's how, you find a hobby, like I said, you get started doing it, go all in on it. And then if you can turn it into something more from there, then that's living the dream.
Yeah, no joke. And then you still have your other hobbies on the side, right? Like, don't forget about the family. Don't forget about the other responsibilities. Yeah, that's,
we squeeze this in when I can, which is, isn't as often as I'd like to, but it's fun stuff. It's fun stuff.
Yeah.
So we got you back in town. And now for people who don't know you or your kind of connection to me or how we know each other, you are Philip Roberts' wife.
I am Philip Roberts' proud wife.
Yeah,
yes.
Anybody that knows Philip and the Roberts family here in Pratt, that's how we know each other. And I've gotten to know you through the years, and it's been fun. So tell people a little bit about what you do and kind of why we thought it'd be fun to sit down and chat.
Yeah, so I work in the world of leadership development, right? And so I work with companies, I work with organizations, I work with teams. So my background, we'll kind of go on a little journey here, but my background's in sport and performance psychology. So when I was in school, I was a tennis player and a swimmer, and I felt like a plumber with a leaky pipe, right? So like I don't know why I'm really good at swimming. Like I can get in, I can swim hard, I can get out. In tennis, I was a total head case, right? I don't know if you can appreciate that being in sports, right? But just like, what was the difference between the two sports? And so that led me on this journey to say, well, what's out there that I can work with people and help people figure this thing out? And that's what took me into sports psychology. So sports psychology is all about how do you help people perform at their best, but how do they use their brains in the best way that they possibly can? And so from there, it's evolved from doing the sport thing to now I work in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long did you do the sport thing? First of all, back up a little bit. You said you played tennis and swam in school. Where did you go to school at?
Well, so in high school. So in high school, I did the swimming and tennis, and then I went to Washburn University in Topeka. Yep, I had a shoulder injury, didn't want to do the whole surgery thing, so I just decided school was my thing. So I went to Washburn, and then I got a master's out at the University of Denver in sport and performance psychology.
Okay. Yeah. And you know, the sports psychology, you hear that, it's become a lot more common. You know, you hear Russell Wilson talking about having a sports psychologist, or
we can talk about Mike Gervais all day. It's amazing how small of a world sports psychology can be once you get into it. But major league teams are getting them. A lot of NFL teams are starting to get on board. The Chiefs need to get on board with that. So it's just a growing industry.
Where was the impetus for that? Like, where did that start? Or is there a point where kind of that transition of or that role even, you know, came on board for teams or players or athletes, or like, is there a point in time that it got popular? Or
so it's really started in around like the 1980s.
So that long ago.
Yeah. So there were a couple of folks. So Ken Ravizza is one of the people that I would kind of deem as a father of sports psychology. And he was working with baseball players because he just recognized he had a background in psychology and said, you know, there is a way that we don't just have to fix people's problems, right? But we can take what we know about how your brain works and apply that directly to sports. And so he did a lot of work. I can't remember which team he was with off the top of my head right now. And then the schools started to grow teaching sports psychology. But I will say, so like Major League Baseball, I'd say they really came into play about 10 to 15 years ago is when we really saw it becoming more of a common thing. And actually, when I graduated from graduate school, I went to work with the U.S. Army because I said, I'm doing the sports psychology thing. It's still really pretty new. Not a lot of people know what it is. But there was a program with the United States Army where I could take the sport and performance psychology and work with soldiers. And I said, well, I don't know much about the Army, but I know some stuff about sports psychology, so let's try this thing out.
So how did those two worlds collide? As far like, how did you bring your expertise into the field of soldiers and veterans and things like that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you right off the bat, so I worked at Fort Bliss down in El Paso, Texas, and at the time it was all infantry. So no women at this point in time were allowed in the infantry. So here I am, this fresh face out of graduate school, like, hey, soldiers, I'm going to come in and I'm going to teach you all these things about how your brain works, how to be a great team, and then we're going to send you on a deployment. So I would say that was probably one of the coolest things that I've ever had the chance to do, though, because there's something to be said for walking into a room of skeptics and having a chance to just talk to them. You don't know exactly what they're going through, but from what you know, you can apply what you know to the situations that they experience, and it becomes just like this cool opportunity to learn with one another.
Well, that's cool. How valuable was that starting on an Army base in a room full of, male, ego-dominant people, and then to be able to transition that into the corporate world? I mean, I would imagine that Army job would prepare you for anything you're going to see.
Oh, absolutely.
Beyond that.
The Army job taught me how to work with anyone at any point in time about anything, right? So there were times in the Army where I'd be like in a classroom, so I'd be working with folks who'd be training for a day. There were times when I was out doing a ruck march, a 13-mile ruck march at 1 o'clock in the morning with some of our special forces guys, and just like kind of talking to them along the way about what's going on with them. I will tell you, I was in really great shape back then. But so it was interesting to think about how really at the core, all of the things that I do is just help people to just be more mentally tough. And like, instead of second guessing yourself or, worrying about how things are going to go, we really talk about how can you build the confidence in yourself to do those things that matter most to you and do them really well.
How does your role come into play as far as, so say you're at the Army or with your corporate job, you're hired on, do people then... Is a boss telling an employee like, hey, you need to go talk to Lindsay? Or are you speaking to a room full of 500 people? Is it more one-on-one? Is it, conference type of things? Like how do the people that need the help, or not need the help, but how do you actually, kind of interface with them on a day-to-day level? Or is, like I said, is it assigned, or do people realize like, man, I could really use her help. I'm going to go talk to her.
Yep.
Or is it kind of like, hey, from 4 to 5, you need to go see Lindsay.
And
then where there's a little bit of,
yep.
reluctance, like I'm only here because you have to be.
Yeah. So this is where I really feel like that role of a coach comes in, right? So in working with a coach, like think about experiences that you've had with a coach. Who are some of the best coaches that you've had? You don't have to name names. If you want to, you're welcome.
Right. No.
But when you think about the best coaches that you've ever had, what are some of the things that they did for you?
A lot of it, just like you said, just good leadership and kind of that back and forth respect.
Yeah. So when it comes to this idea of working with, if it's an individual, it's a team, if it's, a large pocket of an organization, I live by the philosophy that I will never require anyone to talk to me. And the reason being is that if you, think about I think about high school, right? So you had to take a class. And if it's a class that you didn't love, how painful was that every time you went to class? Right. You just dread it. You're miserable. You just have the worst attitude. So how much do you get out of that class? Not much. Right. So I always take the philosophy that I like to work with the willing and teach the willing. And so that can be in an individual basis. So there'll be leaders who come to me and say, you know what, Lindsay, I really have a hard time having difficult conversations with employees. Like, I know that I need to give feedback. I'm not good at giving feedback. Please help me figure out how to give feedback. So that can be one type of conversation that we do one-on-one, right? So then it's this one leader. Nobody else needs to know that we're working together because, of course, there can be, some stigma associated with that.
Right.
And so we can work on things like that. When it comes to a group level, one of my favorite things to do with teams is to really figure out why is it that they exist as a team, right? So if you work in a large organization and you have all of these pockets of jobs that people do, I always wonder, how much do people tie in the job with what they do with a larger organization, because day-to-day work can get very monotonous and it can get boring and it can just be here's another day, right? Kind of like that hamster wheel. And so I love being invited in to work with teams and really define what is the purpose of what they do and why does that bring meaning? Because when we can have that, people are going to be more motivated. They're going to want to work harder. They're going to want to do more things because it's more exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So what all in as far as your job with your corporate world?
Yep.
You've kind of got some plans and ideas, and can you take this out beyond the corporate world as far as how do you apply it to other aspects other than sports or corporate or what other areas is this beneficial to?
Yeah, so I will tell you, I'm not a lifestyle coach, right? So
I did ask you that before. I said, are you a life coach, or is that frowned upon to be called a life coach?
So it's not. Mad respect for those that deem themselves as life coaches out there, right? But there are opportunities to apply this stuff with basically anyone and everyone, right? So one of the fundamental principles that I live by is that nothing gets done except with, by, through, and for people. And I had a great mentor, Gerald Banning, phenomenal human being, and he instilled that in me. And what that has done is it just teaches me that everybody has a meaning. We just need to help people tap into what is that special thing about you that you bring into the team, or what is that special thing about you that you bring to an organization, or how what makes you unique. And so when we think about how we can apply sport and performance psychology concepts, you can really apply it just about anywhere. Because at the end of the day, when something happens, there are thoughts that pop into our head and they drive what we do as a result. And so if we can figure out how to make our thinking work for us instead of against us, man, that just unlocks so much potential.
Right.
Yeah.
How do you get past, you'd mentioned the stigma earlier.
Yep.
How do you get someone to get past the stigma of I'm talking to, a psychologist or a sports psychologist, or, there is that stigma that I don't need help. Everybody goes through this. Why do I need to talk to somebody and, I'll figure it out on my own? How do you get past that bridge of, hey, it is okay to talk to somebody and get some help with, how to be better?
Yep. So one of the things that I always talk about is I just like to think out loud. So one of the things that I do as a coach is we just think out loud, and I focus more on people's strengths than on their weaknesses, because we all have a lot of things that we do well. When we can capitalize on those things that we do well, then it'll help to mitigate some of those weaknesses that we have. I also like to be very goal-oriented and ask the person, what is it that you want to accomplish, right? Because if we can identify what you want to accomplish, we're going to spend more time thinking ahead instead of reliving the past. And it's just kind of a different perspective than you think of psychology, right? When you think of psychology, what kinds of things come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, you think of someone, I think of somebody laying on a couch and, someone talking to me and,
Although I don't have a couch in my office, it'd be great. But yeah, so we're not just going to lay down, we're not just going to lay on a couch and talk about problems for an hour, but we're going to really think about, and a lot of the work is on the person, about how is it that we can do things differently? How can we do things better to help you be more successful? So it's taking more of a positive look on just what it is you're trying to accomplish.
Is that on the macro level or the micro level?
Can do that both. So all, right? So as a team, one of my favorite things to do with teams is an activity called Stop, Start, and Continue. So when you think about just how teams operate, there's like a set of norms, right? A set of things that people do that come naturally or not, things that are spoken that you share or things that you don't share, but people just kind of pick up on over time. And so one of my favorite things to do is to call attention to those through
like what's an example of something like that?
So a perfect example to me is the start time of your day, right? So if I say you need to be able to work on time, well, what pops into your head?
Yeah, 8 o'clock.
Right. So 8 o'clock. So for me, this is a perfect example of something that I tripped up on, one of those unspoken norms that I tripped on when I first started working in the corporate world. So going from the Army, I was taught if you're early, you're on time, and if you're on time, you're late. So for any meeting, I showed up 15 minutes early, and that's just how I operated. So here I am, take this job in a corporate world, and I'm like, okay, I got my first meeting. It's at 9 o'clock. I got to be there at 8:45. So I showed up to the meeting at 8:45. I sat in the room for 20 minutes by myself because it's an unspoken norm. So what I didn't realize about this new environment is that people are jumping from meeting to meeting so much more than the work that I did with the Army. And so that's one of those unspoken norms that I tripped on and didn't realize was like, oh, so that's not how they do things around here. So I had to start asking questions. Yeah. And so if we can really think about how is it that our team operates, then anytime we have somebody new, we can set them up really well for success. And it seems like such a simple conversation to have, but because of the rate at which things are moving, we don't stop to have that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I like that. The on-time thing is a great example because, like you said, you could just say, hey, make sure your work on time. Yeah. And to you, that's 15 minutes early. To somebody else, that might just mean, well, that's after I drop my kids off.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and the way the world is changing right now too, right? So many companies are going to this hybrid model where you work from home some, if you have the opportunity, you work from the office some, and some of the norms that have been established over the pandemic, it's going to be really important to revisit what those are, because what was acceptable during the pandemic may not be the same when we kind of go back into working from the office more often. So, right. But if we just leave things to chance, it's going to mean a lot more difficult conversations. Whereas if we can kind of set those expectations up front, it's just going to make everything easier for people.
How much speaking of the pandemic, how much change did that bring to your industry or to your profession? So much. Just new things that had never happened. And all of a sudden you've got to, does what you do though apply to, situations like that? Like, hey, this is what I thrive in. Like everybody needs more
chaos.
Yeah, everybody needs a little bit more structure and life coaching and this is the best time to be able to do it.
So working in the world of kind of shifting gears from sports psychology into the leadership development, when I first started in leadership development, it felt as though we were kind of running like a college, right? So colleges have their spring semester, they have their fall semester. So I first started by facilitating 75 different classes to one organization 4 out of 5 days a week. And it was in person in front of a group of 25 to 30 people, 4 out of 5 days a week. I will tell you, that is tiring. I love me some people. I love chatting with people, obviously, but that was exhausting. And so that's kind of evolved over time. But one of the things that we know about the best way that people learn, it's not by sitting in a classroom for 2 days at a time and then you say, go forth, do good things. So what the pandemic has really allowed, and I think really called attention to, is this shift in really understanding more how people learn and what's going to be most effective for folks. So, for example, one of the things that I've really worked to do is to transition from having people sit on a computer looking at us for 2 full days, because that's just exhausting.
Yeah.
So we've gone to a model where you attend like a conversation with us for an hour once a week. And what that's done is, one, it helps people learn more. 2, it gives them a chance to apply the information because we're meeting on a more regular basis. And 3, it helps people's schedules, because it's a lot to say. You need to give me 2 full days of your time when, by the way, your work is still going while you're in this class. And so I think it's changed. People feel more comfortable using technology. So working, you can do a presentation to a group of people or have a conversation with a group of people just sitting in front of your computer, and you can get engagement. I mean, we had a virtual conference where it was just open for anyone about well-being, because we saw this need based on the pandemic that folks were just kind of struggling, and this time of year can be really tough for folks. So we had an entire, hour and a half long conversation about burnout, and we had like over 200 people just log in to join us for an hour and a half and join the conversation.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So much more flexibility, so much more adaptability. I think meeting people's needs and just being able to, it takes down some barriers and puts everybody on a level playing field, because now we all know more so how to use the technology that we have available.
Yeah. Now, when I think sports psychology, you've talked a lot about, advice and just coaching and words and things like that. Do you do anything like physical advice? I mean, when I think of sports psychology, I think of Tin Cup and him covered in all the, he's got the yips and it's like, we got to get rid of the yips. And,
yes.
Is there anything that you're like, hey, after you speak with someone or a group of people that you say, okay, now go out and do this, that's more of like physical advice, or that, where it's not just all, talk and coaching and words and like go apply this, but there's more of a actual like, hey, if you went out and did this, something tangible or a regimen to follow. Yeah. Or does that apply to anything you do?
Oh, it absolutely does. So I think one of the perfect examples of this is routines. So I think in baseball, right? So you're going up to bat. If you ever watch the baseball players, they do some quirky things.
Oh, it takes them forever.
Oh, yeah. Depending on who you're watching, right? Like some athletes, they get up there, they get to work, but others of them, it takes a minute. And so, but those routines, what a lot of us, I think, don't realize is how important those routines are. That by doing these weird, quirky little things, it's helping them get their mind right to pay attention to that pitch that's coming to them. And so that's a perfect example of where we will take a baseball player in this example, and we will break down the things that he's doing. And is it just a superstition-based thing, or is it an effective routine? And is it really helping you to get your attention on task and where it needs to be? So.
I was going to say, do you find a lot of times, again, with the baseball player, that routines can be detrimental and not just like, hey, you need to do this routine, but hey, I think your routine is what's causing you problems.
Yeah. And really, I mean, the goal of any routine is to kind of get into what you know and what you've practiced so long, right? So the point of a routine is that your focus may start very broad and you may be seeing all of this stuff that's going on around you, but where does your focus need to be? It needs to be on that ball that's being pitched at you, right? That's where you need to have your attention and your focus. So when working with a routine, you got to see, is my attention going from this broad look at everything that's happening around me to being very narrowly focused on that task at hand?
Now, how do people like me or anybody here listening get access to what you provide? I mean, if we don't all work for Fortune 500 companies or in the corporate world and have someone like you on staff, or we can, tune in with you once a week or, have conferences. So how does the everyday person, are there places online, or are there people like you or you yourself? Do you make your services available to anybody who thinks that might be useful? Like what she's saying really resonates with me, but I don't work for a big company that provides that in their HR department. So, I mean, where do you go? Where do people that, would like to find out more about, I think this could apply to my life, but I don't know where to start. Like, are there places online to do that?
Yeah, for sure. So one, I will offer, if anybody has any questions, ever wants to pick my brain on any of this, like, do not hesitate. If it's sports related, you got a kid that's in sport and you're saying, I feel like things are going kind of well technically, but this mental side of things, they just talk themselves out of stuff. Like, don't hesitate to reach out. I've done a lot of work with folks, both remotely and in person. So always welcome to call me. We can share contact information. The other thing that I will say is it's called the Association of Applied Sport Psychology. So this is where anyone who practices sports psychology, there's kind of a registry of folks that do that. And there are some great resources on the website that are just like, if you're curious about it, wanting to learn more, there's some great information that you can use to get a hold of that. And I've got some great friends that work in Major League Baseball. So if anybody has questions, or Cody, if you want to, grill them more, just let me know.
Yeah, I think it'd be great
too.
Now, are the typical, like say someone like me, or like I said, somebody who's like, I think I could use some help in this area. Is the typical session, I mean, is it like, I think we can talk once and you should be good to go? Or is it once a week? Is it, 4 times a month? Is it, how often do you recommend, or is it just, we'll just see how long this takes, and when we think you're good, and get your wings, you can fly?
Yeah. So it depends, right? And so I think given where your athlete is or where your organization is and the complexity of what you're dealing with, that's going to depend how long things might take. If there were a magic pill that people could just, come talk to me for an hour and everything would be solved, that'd be great. I would say that rarely happens. But typically the way that us in the sports psychology or even in the learning development space operate is we like to do some work, do some hard, thinking and projects together. And then you always have some version of homework. So the next time you're at practice, try this thing out, see how it goes, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So, and depending on, if you're in season, if you're in the off season, I would highly recommend that doing work in the off season is sometimes easier, because then you can really set yourself up going into the season. But so yes, it depends. It depends is the moral of the story.
Yeah. Now, so where does somebody like you, who is, your profession is helping other people get through, what they need to get through or get better at what they're getting better at. So how do the people that do what you do, who do you turn to? I mean, as important as a role as it is that you provide it to other people, are you cognizant of that? Boy, this could probably be helpful for me too, as much
absolutely.
as I preach it. Where do you turn to kind of get these same advice and things like that, if that makes sense?
No, it makes total sense. So I'm a firm believer in mentors, and I think the only reason that I've gotten to the place that I am and have the knowledge that I do is because I've had some phenomenal mentors. So I stay in touch with my professors from graduate school. So Dr. Mark Aoyagi, he works with the Denver Broncos. He's done some work in the NBA. He's kind of all over the place. And so him and I touch base. I also have kind of a core group of peers that we often touch base. So like Brian Miles, one of the best human beings you could ever meet. He works for the Cleveland Indians as their sports psychology practitioner. So him and I talk on a regular basis. I mentioned Gerald Banning. So he's the former chief people officer of a Fortune 500 company, and he just is a great asset in kind of broadening my perspective of how all this stuff works. So I rely heavily on mentors, and they're great because they're like, yes, Lindsay, you're doing well. And they also call me out on my stuff when I need it too. And I feel like that's one of the best things that I can ask for.
Yeah.
Because we can all continue to learn, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as far as continuing, I don't have much else for you unless you got anything you want to turn the table on me again, and we started off that way.
I don't know. I feel like you answered all my questions kind of up front. It was great.
Yeah. Well, I had to get it out of the way so we could get to the good stuff with you.
Yeah. I mean, I love technology. I love, one of the things that I enjoy most about the work that I do is really helping people find like what brings them energy and what brings them kind of that drive that they have. And it's cool to hear that this is one of those things that does that for you.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. It's a fun hobby, and hope to do more of it. And glad you came on with me today, and we'll do some more in the future.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. It's great chatting with you.
Well, it was great chatting, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, till next time, folks.